It's 9:02. We'll open the meeting and we welcome our member councillors. As I said, Councillor PJ Young is running a little bit late this morning. And we welcome Councillor Patterson, Councillor Bowden Lumsden and Councillor McDonald as visitors this morning, and we welcome and thank you for your interest in planning and environment. All right, councillors, we've got a number of start items. We don't have any apologies and there's no leaves of absence. So confirmation of minutes. Do we want to just deal with that separately? Would someone like to move the confirmation of the minutes? Moved by Councillor Gates, seconded by Councillor O'Neill. Councillor Vorster. Take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. Councillors' conflict of interest declarations. Councillor Vorster.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. Mr Chairman, today on item 6.2 we'll be dealing with the Neighbourhood Framework Broadbeach to Burleigh Heads Corridor Community Reference Group Engagement Outcomes and Draft Station Neighbourhood Concept Plans. That report deals very generally with potential planning outcomes across a large swathe of our local government area, and captured within many of these precincts, I have three parties which could have an interest in the matter, that being a friend and electoral donor who donated $3,000 to my campaign in 2016, 11th of January, a friend who owns an apartment, an investment apartment along the corridor, and also friends through my wife who own a development site for which council's already granted me the ability to participate in decisions concerning that site without restriction. But Tony Wilson is a participant in the community reference group itself. I wrote to the city solicitor seeking advice about whether a declarable conflict of interest was warranted, and the advice that I received on all three counts is that I do not need to make a declaration pursuant to section 150EF2A on all three accounts, because the matter deals with an area that, the matter affects a significant number of people in the local government area and therefore attracts an exemption. I don't intend to make a declaration based on the advice that I've received from the city solicitor, which mirrored my own reflections, but I thought I'd bring it to the committee's attention in case there were further questions or someone would like to move a procedural motion otherwise.
Okay, so the decision ultimately is that on all three you're not making any declaration?
Thank you very much. That's my decision, and just to give you some comfort, the three lines here from the city solicitor is: your first DCOI relates to item 6.2 and the electoral donation you received from your friend. In my view, you do not need to make this declaration ... Your second DCOI also relates to item 6.2 and an investment property owned by your friend in the subject area. In my view, you do not need to make this declaration ... Your third DCOI again relates to item 6.2 and a future development site in the subject area owned by your friends. In my view, you do not need to make this declaration ...
I was just getting excited because something came up on the screen. That's all good. Any other declarations, Councillor Gates?
Thank you. Same item, Chairman, in relation to a donation received from Place Design. The first one in 2011 for $1,410. The second in 2014 for $1,850, and the third in 2016 for $1,850 that was fully refunded. I'm making the declaration of a declarable conflict of interest, but I would hope to stay in the room and participate in the discussion and debate, given the importance and impact of light rail within the City of Gold Coast.
Sorry, can we just, what's the conflict in, what's their role in this matter?
Place Design are consultants who have been appointed on behalf of council to provide information relative to the investigations.
Okay. Councillor Vorster?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Councillor Gates. Could I just understand, I suppose I want us to take a consistent approach to declarations on this matter. Could I understand how you've drawn a distinction between my potential declarations and your own, and whether or not the same sort of exemption may apply to you as I've been advised on mine?
No, I don't believe so, because I've had 3 donations over 3 years, and in my understanding it is necessary in those circumstances, even though I fully refunded the 2016 amount, that's not respected as nullifying that donation under the legislation. So we are being consistent. I have not failed to make a declaration in this regard on any matter where Place Design has been involved, purely as a consultant, which is interesting because they get paid regardless of any decision that we make around this chamber, but they're the rules and that's what I do.
Yeah, I think you were just trying to compare your declaration with yours, Councillor Gates. It wasn't anything to do with you now
was
and
more
you
about
historically. Me. Just obviously when Councillor Vorster opened it to the floor to say, do you think I should make a declaration? You've obviously differentiated your conflict from his.
Well, my last
I think
donation,
is what he's trying to get to.
My last donation received was after the 2016 election. It was in November of that year. I presume yours was in the lead up to the 2016 election, which means no provisions from the relevant term apply to you, which is why I'm not concerned. I don't believe they actually apply to me either, but the legislation does. So I will continue to make these declarations. No, it's not a prescribed interest.
No,
it's
but it's only a prescribed. It's not a prescribed interest because it's $150 short. Is that right? But the date would have triggered it, and that's your concern?
The date triggers it for me, even though I fully refunded the entire amount. It still triggers for me a declarable conflict of interest.
Okay.
And the city solicitor has given me that advice previously, so I'm acting on her advice that a declarable conflict of interest does exist.
So does that answer your question, Councillor Vorster?
Yeah, absolutely. And I only raise it to performance manage my own declaration, not your own.
Certainly.
Councillor Gates. So it appears to me then that the difference in approach comes on the back of different advice from the city solicitor and the timing of a donation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Gates.
Okay. So I'm happy to move that Councillor Gates should participate in the decision despite the councillor's conflict of interest because the party with whom the conflict arises is retained by council as a consultant. And Councillor Gates's contribution to the matter outweighs any perceived conflict that may exist. So, councillors, this is not a situation where the donor is acting for a third party. They're actually our consultant. I suspect they probably know more about it than Councillor Gates does in terms of what's got us to this point in the reporting. So,
well, Chairman, I've had no conversation with anyone about the matters that are within the agenda today.
So I think on that basis, if there was a perceived conflict between your interest and that of anyone else, that it's outweighed by the fact that they're just a consultant retained by us. So I'm happy to move that if someone wants to second it. Seconded by Councillor Pauline Young. So we'll take the vote. All in favour, and we'll call a division. Councillor Hamill, Councillor Owen Jones, Councillor Pauline Young, Councillor O'Neill, Councillor Caldwell, Councillor Vorster. Do we take a vote from you? I can't remember. I don't think we take a vote if it's conflict on the same...
He didn't make a declaration.
Oh, you didn't make a declaration. Okay. And Councillor Vorster. Against? That's carried. Councillor Gates did not vote. All right, any other?
Chairman, can I also advise the committee that in item 6.3, there are mentions of the same company, again, as being a supporter of the program, but I did seek advice from the city solicitor, and she tells me that Gold Coast Open House is a not-for-profit incorporated association run by a volunteer committee of dedicated architects, professionals, etc., and no one mentioned in the group is listed as members, so no declarations are required. Sunland is also mentioned in that group, but I've checked with the city solicitor and no conflicts are required. Declarations.
Okay. Thank you. And we welcome Councillor Peter Young, who's
Once again, my apologies. Thank God.
made it 2 minutes ahead of your anticipated arrival time, so that was good.
Thank you.
Did you catch one of those new buses from Nerang? Is that what you... On demand.
All the green lights.
Yes, on the other day.
From the butcher to here.
It was a way in motion green train. Okay, so we've just, Councillor Young, we've just dealt with the potential conflict of interest declarations. Did you have anything in that you needed to? All right, any other conflicts of interest, councillors, before we move on? All right, so we have a number of start items. 6.1, 6.3, 6.5 and 6.6. Did anyone want to unstar any of those? And I don't know, was the late item starred or was it? It is starred. Okay, so we'll just, no, it's all right. Just relax, relax. That's what I was asking. So if we can unstar the late item to do with Robina, which 6.7. So we'll unstar 6.7. Anyone else want to unstar any of the other start items? 6.1. Thank you, Councillor O'Neill. All right, so that leaves 6.3, 6.5, 6.6. Moved by Councillor Peter Young. Seconded by Councillor O'Neill. All in favour? Against? Carried. Do we want to take a division on that? Councillor Gates, are you concerned?
But I was just a little bit late.
We can ask it later.
Okay, 6.5 maybe it was. Yeah, 6.5.
Okay, so we'll move back to 6.1. Councillor O'Neill will just have a short presentation, do you think? Or do you just
I
want to
think
ask?
maybe a short presentation, yes, please.
Through the chair, today we're here to present an application. Sorry, let's go back. For a material change of use for a dual occupancy, that is impact assessment at 47 Marion Street, Tugun. As you can see there, the site is located on the edge of the medium density residential zone, west of the Gold Coast Highway down there in Tugun, not too far from the Tugun Bowls Club. Surrounding the site is predominantly residential dwellings, predominantly at this point in time. Views to the east over towards the coast. I've also included on that slide there where a couple of the properly made submissions were received from. The application today is proposing a a full third story dual occupancy. A dual occupancy land use is an accepted subject to requirements use within the medium density residential zone. However, this application seeks to establish a dual occupancy that has a 12.2 metre building height that exceeds the 9 metre height designation, and it also proposes a full third story. So it's that aspect of the application that triggers it to impact assessment.
So can we just clarify that? Is that view the slide previous? Yeah, that one. So is that from the street?
That is from the street view.
And so can you just on that front show us what's the height? Like where's that 12 metres?
That might be best demonstrated, Councillor, through this slide here, or actually the other side there. That's the higher side. The site's obviously got a bit of slope from the front to rear. So we're looking at the top portion there at the highest level, at that back section of the uppermost level is where the height of the proposal is 12.2 metres. It's got a, yep.
Councillor Jones.
So on that same slide, the height of the existing building on site?
The height of the existing building on site is about 10 metres, as you can see there at the rear, 9.92 metres. So it is quite a high building already. If we go back to this slide here, that's the existing building on site there. That is a dwelling house. It already is quite a prominent building on the street, and over the 9 metre prescribed building height already.
So sorry, when you say 10 point, whatever it was you just said,
yep,
is that at that tallest point from the top of the pitch of the roof to the very bottom at the rear of the house?
Correct.
Okay,
yep.
and so and the equivalent of that number for this new proposal is what?
12.2.
Okay.
So we're looking at about
2 metres.
2 metres roughly.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. In considering the impacts of this application, like we've got here in the highlighted section of these slides, it's really those portions there that you can see on the screen now that are above the 9 metre prescribed building height. As part of the assessment of the application, Council had some concerns with the setbacks, particularly at the upper level. So they were able to increase the setback of that utmost level to the wall to be 2.5 metres, which is AO compliant. Also noting that the setback to the street was increased, and in response to Council's information request, they had to drop the height of the proposal, to comply with the airport environment and overlay code, and to reduce the mass of the building, and I think that ended up being approximately a 1.5 metre lowering of the height overall. As we'd all be aware, the site is in the urban neighbourhood zone, and they're afforded the opportunity to comply, well, the opportunity to have an uplift up to 50% above the building height overlay. That would allow them to get to a height of 13.5 metres and 3 stories, subject to complying with the outcomes of specific outcome 3.3.2.1.9 A to H. Officers believe that they do comply with those requirements for a number of reasons, which I'll touch on a couple quickly. There are a number of 3-storey developments within the area. I wouldn't say it's the predominant character, but there are examples of it. The site slopes down significantly from front to rear, and they've set the building down away from the streetscape, so it presents pretty much as a 2-storey development from the street. They've also got double the applicable setback to Marion Street at 8 metres, whereby they could be up to 4 metres from the street. They've got a lot of landscaping in the frontage. A key one for me was also the fact that a lot of the development around that area is orientated out towards the coast to take advantage of the views. So even the neighbouring dwellings, while they will be adjacent to something that's a little bit higher than the existing dwelling on the site, all of their windows and main living areas are orientated out towards the coast. So officers didn't believe that there was any significant amenity or character impacts as a result of the additional height. They responded to the site topography appropriately, and we also believe it constitutes an excellent standard of appearance for a dual occupancy. On the basis that the application complies with the uplift provisions, officers considered the application to be appropriate. There were a few submissions received in response to the public notification process. 3 of those were properly made submissions, consisting of 2 objections and 1 in support. And 6 submissions were received that were not properly made, consisting of 6 objections and a petition including 18 signatures. Interestingly, all the letters of objection, including the petition, submitted the same identical letter template with an individual signature at the bottom. The matters raised in those submissions included non-compliance with the uplift test, privacy, site cover, shadow impacts, building height, car parking, and streetscape character. Officers have addressed those impacts through the report and considered the outcome to be addressing those concerns. And in the end, officers' recommendation is for approval subject to conditions. Are there any questions?
Councillor Gates.
Thanks, Chair. Through you, Chairman, can you just explain to me how the car parking, the access to the garage of Unit 1 works? Is there a double driveway access that serves both of those garages, or?
That's correct. There's a single driveway access through the chair that provides access from Marion Street. What's the best one? I might not have a slide there, but you've got the plans in the agenda today. If you go to...
Is it page 79? Because that's where I'm confused.
Okay.
Because on the... So they're totally divided, these 2 units, but is there just a single driveway access to Unit 1 and a double driveway access to Unit 2?
Through the chair, there's only one driveway access, which you might be able to see from this 3D perspective on the screen. It comes down close to the fence line there, and then they drive around to access the garage to Unit 2. So Unit 1, one of the units could drive straight into their double garage. The other one has to tuck around to the left and then go into the other garage. So there's only a single driveway access.
So have we checked the actual accessibility to that car park?
Yes, through the chair, we got them to demonstrate swept paths that they could achieve access to Unit 2. Transport officers were comfortable with those aspects.
Because there's actually...
Be awful. Absolutely awful.
There's actually like concrete slab above the garage for Unit 1. So they've got to go down the driveway and then left and then right to park the car.
That's correct.
Doesn't seem right to me. Chris. While Chris is coming out, Councillor Vorster.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Maybe you can tack this onto your question of Chris. I didn't see in the report, maybe because I skimmed past that particular relevant section, but what protections do we put in place for the 1 unit owner that has to cross that driveway? I mean, if the 1 unit has guests over and they've parked in the driveway, you could create access issues for that second dwelling. And I'm thinking of everything from emergency vehicles to visitors, kids' bikes. So is there an easement arrangement that would need to be registered?
I'll try and answer that one through the chair, and if I don't satisfy you, Councillor Vorster, perhaps Chris can comment. But generally speaking, for a dual occupancy development, we don't require easements for reciprocal access rights for 1 unit owner versus the other. It's generally a fairly well-known arrangement by the residents that live there. It's a low-speed environment for cars on the driveway. We don't require any formalised pedestrian access.
So is this going to be cut into two lots? Like we're expecting this to be subdivided?
Could well be building format plan or subdivision.
So I mean, it'll be body corporate common property, I would expect, on the driveway. So then they'll...
But when is that established? And the reason why I ask is in parts of our city lakes, they've got these weird driveway configurations off the end of cul-de-sacs, and they cause perpetual neighbourhood dispute. And then council's intervention is required, and anyway, it's just ended up with all sorts of police complaints and all of that repeatedly. It would have been much easier if there was an actual easement registered or something in the actual development approval that precluded one household from blocking the driveway, so that we could intervene, like have standing to intervene.
I mean, I don't know how we don't normally deal with it, do we, Roger? Because like every duplex on the Gold Coast has exactly the same configuration with one driveway access point.
No, not...
Well, a lot of them do. In fact, we insist that they have one driveway access point is actually the... Yeah.
Both properties.
Yeah, but the same blockage
equally.
could occur. If anyone leaves their car on the driveway, then it can occur.
But I suppose, Mr. Chairman, it's more likely that you get someone doing a dodgy and driving over the nature strip to get into their garage, where my understanding, looking at the fencing, there's no way for somebody to squeeze past a vehicle by driving informally on the nature strip to manoeuvre into what's a very tight sweep path.
Agreed. Through the chair, there is no ability for someone to sneak around the driveway, but like Councillor Caldwell mentioned, we generally insist on a single access driveway, particularly where the frontage width isn't over 20 metres. So it's a fairly standard practice for dual occupancies.
So, Mr. Chairman, through you, I'm very comfortable and happy with a single driveway because we don't want to reduce on-street car parking, right? Totally get that. I'm totally on board. I'm just anticipating dispute down the track between two households, and I would have thought that at the time of a development approval, it would have been good to formalise equitable access into the second unit, particularly if someone's ageing in place in a decade or two to come, and they may need carers to visit, ambulances may need to access. If we don't protect access into that garage, then I'd say that we're approving effectively half a garage because they can't necessarily use it.
Can we just go back to the actual physical access question? There's a duplex on Bayview Street at Runaway Bay which has two garage doors facing each other with some degree of separation, and it's quite apparent to me that they cannot manoeuvre themselves into the garage. They certainly can't get two cars in there on a regular basis because they end up parking in front of the driveway door, the garage doors, like so. So I'm really interested in how we're expecting someone to manoeuvre a vehicle down, then left, and then right, and then to meet the car parking requirements, they're supposed to get two of them in there.
Mr. Chair, for residence 1, opposite the garage, and I don't think it shows on any of the drawings in the presentation.
Probably not.
There's
Page 140.
or 139, 140, if you've got the hard copy there.
Yeah.
Shows a turnaround bay opposite the garage. So what they can do if they've got a larger car is swing around into the turning bay and then reverse back into their garage, or they can do that in reverse order. They can drive forward into their garage and then reverse back into the turning bay to assist them.
So, I mean, the fact that that turning bay is there absolutely backs up our concern, because you can't make the manoeuvre without that turning bay, really, can you?
In a larger car, you'd have to do a multi-point turn to manoeuvre into the garage, so the turning bay is there to assist them to do that much more easily.
Summer breeze. What's your view, Gal?
Councillor O'Neill?
Well, that was probably the least of my problems. I sort of looked at this very carefully because of the objections from the residents in the street, because I think this is the first, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr Brown, this is the first application we've had with the applying for the 50% uplift in Marion Street.
Through the chair, that's correct,
Yeah.
yes.
And it has got residents of the street quite concerned, mainly for I think it's to the design, not so much of the garage, but of the actual building itself, because they don't consider that it's the sense of place. The next door neighbour, I believe, is lodging something similar. So I think the intent of the 50% uplift, this is what we're going to see in medium density residential streets, because the designs are different, architecture's different, and it will be different to the normal 9 metre buildings that are there now. I was very happy when they did reduce their setbacks, as they were asked to do, and their front setback is now 8 metres, which is great. They've actually done a lot to satisfy the information requests that were sent to them. I don't know, I can't put up a refusal, I really can't. The concern with the residents is mainly the 50% uplift and whether it meets the requirement. I think the assessing planners have done a pretty good job in assessing it, and I'm happy to move it. The garage I didn't think was a problem because of the turning bay. So
I'm glad we fleshed that out at least, because it wasn't apparent on the plans really until we found that second lot. So
yeah, I did question the frontage, having a dual occupancy on a 15 metre frontage instead of 20 metre, but that apparently is quite usual as well. So, and as I say, they haven't gone the whole 50% uplift, and because of the slope of the block, I think it does appear as a 2-storey building. And Mr Brown's right, they do look, most of the houses on that road, on that side of the road, look out over the ocean. It's a pretty nice street.
So if we can just go back to the slide that has the side thing. I mean, so if I'm correct, my understanding is that it looks like at the front it actually presents as effectively compliant 9 metres. That's pretty much what we see at
That's correct.
the front elevation.
It actually maintains a height from the street level of 6.4 metres because it steps down a bit further from Marion Street.
Yeah, which is why I was asking about from that the front on image, and I can't read it on our documents here, but it looks like is it 6.5? Like,
that's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So, it's a very difficult site for someone to work with. And if it's actually showing as 6.5 from the street, I don't think we could expect any less. So, Councillor Gates.
Chairman, could I foreshadow a change that suggests the redesign of the driveway access to provide equal accessibility for each dwelling? Because there's, as Councillor O'Neill has said, there's an 8 metre setback. They've got plenty of room to work within that area to provide a central driveway that allows access to each unit equally. I would imagine the only reason it's designed in the way it is to allow the subdivision to occur up the track, and perhaps I don't know whether that could still occur if that were the case, but I would like to foreshadow that change and see how it goes.
So, Councillor O'Neill, one solution there, Chris, you might be able to help us, is obviously a traditional single driveway going down with an equal access point on either side. I don't know how they deal with the access to the house in that situation, but for the houses.
Yeah. Through the chair, that would require a change to their design. You may see from this elevation here, they've got a central pedestrian access that you can see there through the middle that provides their pedestrian access to the property. So that if they were to have a centralised driveway, they'd have to remove that portion. I'm not sure about the manoeuvring to car parks, that sort of thing, but one of the reasons why we were comfortable was because they had a substantial amount of deep planting that would be able to soften it at the frontage. I guess if we're keeping the same single driveway but just shifting its location, they may still have the ability to have that landscaping, but it will probably be at the sides as opposed to the middle, where we thought it was providing a greater softening effect to the building.
So, Councillor O'Neill, what's your feeling on
I think it's unreasonable to ask them to, because they'll have to do quite a redesign, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's balancing up the value of opening up the driveway access versus the softening of the landscape, and then not. I mean, at this point in time, the car parks are barely visible, which might be a preferable outcome. But
I'm just hoping that, Chris, your assessment. I'm counting on your assessment, really.
No pressure.
Yeah, that's right. The dimensions are minimum in accordance with Australian standard, and really to assist the residents, they've provided that turning bay just to provide that extra manoeuvrability for the residents to get in and out.
All right, Councillor Gates, why don't we maybe just leave it as is for now. I'll let Councillor O'Neill move it in its current form, and then perhaps if we can just turn our minds to if there's some improvement that could be made between now and full council. Having heard what some of the issues are, I think that might be helpful. You happy with that, Councillor O'Neill? Councillor Gates, are you okay with that? You can still, if you want to formally move an amendment, I think that's okay, but we don't actually have a solution to put up, so we'll move the recommendation by Councillor O'Neill. Someone like to second that? Councillor Owen-Jones. Councillor O'Neill, did you want to speak to it?
No, that's all right, thank you.
Councillor Gates, did you want to move an amendment on the record, or are you happy to?
It's been discussed unless there were issues. And I mean, I established that as an issue just from glancing at my agenda at home. But, because we deal with these issues over and over again. But if Councillor O'Neill's happy and the officers think it works, I'm happy to just not vote for it.
All right. We'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. And we'll just record Councillor Gates as voting in the negative. 6.2. Okay, 6.2, councillors. Yep, far away.
Good morning. Through the chair, councillors, today we just want to provide you with a short presentation to update you on the status of the Neighbourhood Framework project. This will include an update on the recent community reference group meetings that we've held, the draft concept plans that have been developed through that process, and our proposal for an additional tailored engagement activity on the draft concept plans prior to their finalisation. So just a quick background for councillors. In August 2021, Council endorsed the Neighbourhood Framework, which was the strategy document for the Broadbeach to Burleigh Heads corridor. Council also endorsed a shortlist of community reference group candidates, and since then City Planning has continued on and completed those 8 community reference group meetings, 4 for each area. The CRG groups represented a broad demographic of people who live, work, own property or businesses within the areas, and the members also came from a range of cultural backgrounds and occupations that were really valuable for us and provided additional insights into these neighbourhoods that we're planning for. So the CRG meetings included a number of educational presentations that helped the CRG members get a clearer understanding of how we plan for the future of our city, and also how these neighbourhoods can play a really important part. They also included some very interactive sessions and activities where members engaged with each other and with officers, discussing and recording their views. So in Community Reference Group Meeting 1, we did an opportunities and barriers analysis in each of the neighbourhoods and completed a vision exercise where we talked about what high quality planning outcomes would look like within these communities as more people come to live within them. In Community Reference Group Meeting 2, we identified the key features within each of these neighbourhoods, and we spatialised them to make sure that those elements that make these neighbourhoods distinct and loved would be able to be recognised in future planning. We also had discussions about good growth allocation, talking about the areas within these neighbourhoods where building categories that are highly appropriate could be allocated to cater for additional dwellings. And this then rolled into some infrastructure discussions with those groups where members talked about the type of infrastructure support that would be needed in these neighbourhoods as more people call them home. Officers from across the organisation from different network areas also joined us in these meetings and provided some specialist advice relating to parks, open space, transport, stormwater, placemaking and more. In CRG Meeting 3, we discussed how the neighbourhood form could be shaped. Within the building form categories that we discussed at the previous meeting, we explored whether the upper or lower limits of those would be appropriate at a much more detailed, finer-grained neighbourhood scale. And then following these discussions, we moved on to talk about priorities in design, with the group activities focused on prioritising the type of design outcomes that are important in these neighbourhoods to ensure that additional development provides for quality outcomes into the future. Then for our final meeting for CRG4, we met with the group and we provided them with a bit of a snapshot of the first draft of the concept plans and held a Q&A session with the CRG members. We also discussed how the group feels and thinks that the concept's fair against some of the benchmarks that we set out with at the start. For example, the community survey results, the neighbourhood framework vision, the principles, amongst others. And we also provided the members with an opportunity to complete a survey on the draft concept and discuss what they liked, what they would improve, and any other comments they felt were relevant. So overall, there was a great deal of diversity in the views amongst the participants in the groups. We noticed that even at each table, there were different views about the preferred options for the future of these neighbourhoods. And so although those views varied, the groups had very robust, very respectful discussions that provided us with a lot to consider and incorporate into the draft plans. So today, officers are proposing a final round of tailored engagement on the draft concept plans. This was not included in our additional engagement plan. However, we're now recommending circling back to the survey respondents who engaged with the Neighbourhood Framework project in 2021, particularly those who stated that they wanted to be kept updated on the project. So of the 1,826 survey respondents, 84% stated that they wanted to be kept informed of the outcomes and notified of future community engagement opportunities relating to this project. And so we see this as an opportunity to close the loop on our engagement and allow those survey participants to view the concept plans and that have resulted from this neighbourhood framework and provide some feedback if they would like to through the form of a survey. This feedback will enable us to update the concept plans based on that feedback, and whilst there will still be a formal submission engagement carried out as part of a future city plan update package, doing this during a tailored engagement stage provides us with an opportunity to be able to more easily and readily incorporate that feedback. So a number of key inputs have helped us develop the draft concept plans. These include the citywide survey results, the endorsed neighbourhood framework, the community reference group feedback, infrastructure network feedback, and a number of planning policies and investigations. We're now proposing additional tailored engagement with the neighbourhood framework survey participants prior to finalising the concept plans and bringing them back to council in mid-2022. So the full concept plans are provided in attachment 2 and 3 of item 6.2. However, to streamline the presentation today, we just wanted to focus on the proposed land use, height and infrastructure maps within them, highlighting some key changes proposed. So regarding the Nobby Beach and Miami North land use change map, there has been no wholesale change to the non-residential land uses within the station neighbourhoods. The survey results and the community reference group members recognised the value of the existing commercial and employment areas, and maintaining the local offering provided by the low impact industry areas was really important to the group. But they did recognise an opportunity and the suitability of the area for startup businesses that are compatible with those low impact industry uses. And this has been reflected in the land use intent. There is no additional expansion of the areas for mixed use or centres proposed in this map. However, new opportunities on those sites in the mixed use and neighbourhood zones have expanded because of the newly proposed building height opportunities there. So regarding building height changes proposed, the most notable height changes have been proposed along the Gold Coast Highway and concentrated in areas that are closest to the newly proposed stations. The Neighbourhood Framework Survey revealed that the community supported dwelling growth along high-frequency public transport routes, close to shops and services in neighbourhood centres, and in low-density areas that are ready for renewal. And so the outcomes that we've proposed here are quite consistent with this and the Neighbourhood Framework principles that have guided our planning here. So the building heights were limited in areas where key natural features like beaches and headlands were present, because these help define and typify the local coastal character. The CRG groups also identified some key east-west links that they believed were suitable locations for increased height, and generally the group supported lower heights on sites that were located further from stations in the Gold Coast Highway on the west. It is important to note that in the Nobby Beach, Miami North area that there are no new high-rise buildings proposed across the entire area, with maximum heights of 33 metres allocated on limited sites. This is in line with a very strong community response supporting this in the initial survey. Areas of 15 metres and below will be appropriate for the low-medium zone proposed within major update 2 and 3. This may provide opportunities for more housing choice options and missing middle product and outcomes that are designed to be compatible with the existing low-density dwellings.
Yep. The area to the south of the solid black line, is that all 9 metre?
Yes, that's correct.
No, thanks.
And sorry, while we've got a pause, just when you say no new high rises, and we've got the 33 metres there, when you say there's no new, is that because that's an existing height parameter in that location?
So there are no high rises within this area at all. Within the Christine Ave and 2nd Ave station neighbourhood areas, there are existing high-rise buildings that have remained, but no new additional there either. So we haven't proposed anything new above 33 metres.
Okay, so just for the sake of those watching at home, at 33 metres you could still get a 10-storey building, which in a technical definition is not a high-rise. It's the top end of medium rise. Is that what you're
That's correct.
getting at? Okay. So I think we should just make it clear that the expectation is in those locations is something up to, say, 10 stories, and the community should, depending on their view of what a high-rise might be from a community perspective, that might be just something we should clarify for the record. Councillor Baldwin-Lumsden.
It was just a quick point on that, Chair. Is this area still afforded the 50% uplift?
So our intent is that the areas where we have found the appropriate height, the 50% uplift test would not apply here. So the heights that we have come to, if endorsed, will be the maximum heights.
So, Councillor Barton-Lumsden, you might remember some comments that I made at full council, I think, last week on that point. So where we've got a fresh body of work that can justify the height limit being maintained as the absolute limit, that's what we would try and do. Councillor Owen-Jones and Councillor McDonald.
It was going to be a very similar question, but if we're not going to have a 50% uplift, is there any merit at all in having a very minor, maybe 5% to allow for lift overruns and things like that? I think part of the challenge we've had is explaining to people that we don't have a prescriptive scheme and that the 50% is that absolute handbrake, but is there any benefit at all in having even a minor amount to allow for a small amount of flexibility, which comes from time to time?
I mean, possibly. Like, that's really a policy question for us to try and reach at some point.
Well, I suppose on one hand we're wanting that absolute, and that's the only reason why we have the 50%, so that there actually is a ceiling. If we remove that entirely, is there actually a benefit in having something there?
I would say that the most valuable thing for us to do would be to get some legal advice on that point. But yeah, I'm happy to consider it, because I think the whole purpose of the 50% in the 2016 scheme was without broadly changing the heights across the city, because we didn't undertake a whole of city height review, to try and provide some limitations so that the things that were happening under the old scheme towards the end of its life, which were 10, 15 stories in a 3-storey zone, could not occur in people's backyards. So, you know, it's evolving. Councillor McDonald, then Councillor Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to ask the question about the 50% uplift. With the height, you either have the height or you don't. You know, what we've seen before, once you start allowing 3 metres, applications come in for 10 metres. So you either have a cut-off point or you don't.
Yes, I mean, the problem was that in the 03 scheme we had a cut-off point and it was impact to forever above that. So it actually wasn't a cut-off point. And so, you know, it's trying to work our way through a performance-based scheme. Councillor Gates, and also in a way that the state will sign off on it. Councillor Gates.
That's exactly the point that I wish to make, Chairman. Why wouldn't we consider reducing the heights and retaining the 50% option? So,
well, I mean, and we might do that. This is very early on in terms of whether or not it becomes the case that the 33 metres that's mapped there becomes 29.
Or even 15.
You know, or 20 with a 50% uplift, so that at the upper end we're getting the impact assessable applications. That's probably, we're not quite there yet. Is that a fair assessment?
It was just a thought that the state had found that 50% uplift acceptable, so it might be the best angle to attack it, given that we don't have a prescriptive scheme and we can't say that 23 metres, for example, will be it. It does give us the capacity to control it, and it would be something I'd like to see us look at.
And thank you, and through the chair. And I just on that point, it was quite evident, and in listening to what Councillor McDonald said, one of the biggest bugbears for the people in the room was that 50% uplift. They would actually far more want to know what a height is, and they actually identified to us too that not everyone chooses to go to the maximum height on their site. Quite a few people choose, in that room actually said, we choose to underdevelop our sites because we don't want to be the same as everybody else in the area. So there was the support, more support for actually having a more definitive height. I can understand what Councillor Owen-Jones was saying. We know what lift wells and that can do. But there was also people in the area that said, regardless of whether it's 6 or 8 stories, we actually only want to build 2, 3-storey dual occupancies on our site. So not everyone chooses to overdevelop the site, and I think, and I for one, I'm guilty of it. It's when we get caught up in the room here, everything that we actually see is people who are pushing it to the absolute maximum boundary, but not everyone wants to overdevelop. And we also know about amalgamating sites is not always as easy to do, and going forward I think it'll be more difficult because of the way the real estate market is. So it's just, anyhow, it's just some feedback.
Sorry, Chairman, I'm just not sure that everyone understands the performance-based scheme that we have, and that these heights might be what we think it should sit at, but if someone lodges an impact assessable application, then the likelihood is they can apply for whatever they want, and the only way that we can be absolute has proven to be through the 50%, whereby we stipulate that that is going to be the absolute maximum. And in my experience, we've never varied from that extra 50%. So people have an absolute guarantee when we set a height limit and give that 50% uplift opportunity, they know it's not going to be 50 stories, for example. So
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and I will defer to the local council has been so involved in this process, but I just wanted to highlight I had this absurd situation in my own division where council had a very contemporary approval for a building, and before that building was constructed, council used the fact that we had an approval for that building to then go approve additional height on top of a non-existent development on the basis that this earlier stage of the tower had been approved. And now my community's saddled with this extraordinarily large and bulky building on a busy roundabout on the basis that it's a great gateway to my suburb. Couldn't disagree more. Had I had the benefit of a 50% uplift test, then maybe that approval wouldn't have got up over the line. So I think we should take advantage of every opportunity to provide residents with some certainty. And if that means using this 50% measure that the state's on board with, we should look at it. Because through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councillor Pauline Young, my sense reading the CRG is that there is support up to this height and people are looking for certainty. And certainty is the thing that we need to deliver. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Be helpful if we all provided that messaging to the community so that they understand that that's the best way that we've navigated a difficult state program of planning to deliver it. Councillor Patterson, then Councillor McDonald.
Thank you. My concern is this is all a little academic at the moment, because whilst the state government is not bothering to look at our city plan amendments, whether they're taking seriously our caps on our finite targets on the targeted growth areas, we have no idea. So I have a question through you, Chair. First of all, when you this last round, what are you calling it? Tailored? Or do you want to go to those questions now, or are you finished? Sorry.
Well, let's press on.
Yeah, but that's my concern with this. It's all, we don't know what they think of our finite targets at the moment.
I mean, the most important thing we can do is talk to our community, get their input up front, which is what we've done. If the state chooses to go on some sort of frolic that doesn't reflect what our community wants and what we as a council think is the best representation of that, then that will ultimately be on them. Let's just keep going with the presentation. We'll come. Let's just wait. Unless you've got something about one of those dots on the map.
Well, it's about discussions that have just been held that I think that we should also consider. Mr. Chair, what we've got to keep in mind with the 50% uplift and what's been happening throughout the city and in my division too, is that applicants have been coming in, applying for a code accessible application. Once they get that code accessible, as soon as that application is approved, they're then coming in for under the 50% uplift. So I think you've got to keep that in mind when you're looking at the 50% uplift, because it's certainly a different level of assessment between code accessible and impact accessible. So when they come in for the 50% uplift over their, say, 29 metres, it's only that extra few metres that's impact. It's not the whole building.
Councillor Young and Councillor Gates.
Just one, thank you, Chair, and just one comment on that, and just back to what Councillor Patterson was saying. Every meeting that we had, there was at least 2 state representatives in it from the South East Queensland Regional Planning and all that. They were officers there, and I went to all 8 of them, so there was state officers there for all of these presentations to hear actually what our residents and that. So it's not that the state's not being involved, but they, and some of those, and I can just say in their favour, some of those nights it was hammering down with rain and they still came down and they took questions, and they also took some very, at stages, negative feedback from the residents, but they took it all on board.
Oh, thanks, Chairman. Just in relation to Councillor McDonald's comments, I wanted to ask through you to the Director if she's aware of that circumstance and how often it might have arisen.
Through you, Mr Chair. I do recall there was a development on the highway at Palm Beach. I can't think of the street, on the corner of the Gold Coast Highway. Mick's just coming out now, where I believe they did that with a cafe, Councillor McDonald, which was a listed use.
Well, on the corner of Palm Beach Ave and the highway.
The highway, yeah.
Which was a ground, which, you know, originally a medical approval, then went to cafe, restaurant.
Yeah,
in
that's
Impact.
the one that I can
But
recall.
I mean, to me, it seems a bit absurd that we would have put cafe, restaurant into Impact when that's exactly the activation we want at the ground floor plane in that location.
Don't forget the application on the 23rd Avenue where they had code accessible approval, then they come back in because they forgot to lift well.
So it's
Let's
not
move
a
on with the
regular
present.
thing.
Let's move on.
It is. And I can dig them up.
Okay, that'd be great.
Through the Chair, the public realm transport and infrastructure maps within the concept plans provide insight into the different planned investigations and works that are being coordinated by the city in these areas. They include new pedestrian connections and crossings, streetscape or placemaking investigations, stormwater projects, active transport connection improvements, on-street car parking studies, cycle path upgrades, and some park upgrades or investigations. Some of the details of these plans are included in the implementation section of the draft concepts. So regarding the land use map for Christine and 2nd Avenue, there is no proposed expansion to the commercial or industrial areas here either, but opportunities for employment and emerging business to operate within the existing low impact industry areas have been recognised. Existing neighbourhood centre and mixed use areas will remain with additional development opportunity provided through increased height options. Changes to building heights in Christine Ave and 2nd Ave are similar to Nobby Beach and Miami North, with the most notable height changes proposed along the Gold Coast Highway and concentrated in areas closest to the newly proposed stations. The building heights step down, moving westward away from the stations and away from the Gold Coast Highway. Key view lines from important vantage points were considered and heights restricted where they could obstruct notable views, particularly to the distant hinterland ridge lines. The CRG groups generally also supported height increases along key east-west corridors, and particularly along Christine Ave and Mountain View Avenue. The existing high-rise area between the Gold Coast Highway and the Esplanade will remain as existing. However, no new additional high-rise building heights were nominated across the entire area, with the maximum newly proposed heights between 30 and 33 metres on sites close to stations.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm just interested in the thinking behind the gap from Lamana to Hibiscus. So we've got 33, and then we drop to 15, and then we're back up to 21. I would have thought that we would have tried to concentrate that height and density closer to the station, and it seems as though there's this, to me at least, an arbitrary diminution of height. Could I just get a bit of feedback on why we ended up with that?
Through the chair, if you go back to the previous map, saying that actually is that business precinct, and so 15 metres is what we use for those sort of semi-industrial areas. So it was just retaining that existing height allowance.
So, like, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to precinct tomorrow. Can't wait. Going to go have some craft beers, which I think's in that area. Yep. So, fully support that. It just, I would have thought that we could have ended up with some interesting mixed-use development that could take advantage of, volumetric, different styles of development volumetrically. I appreciate that you don't want to go put people's bedrooms above a panel beater, that I absolutely get. But if I have a look at that precinct now, and it's got a craft brewery in there, and I think about South Bank that has a James Squire, for example, and you've got craft brewery and residential above there. I just thought we could have solicited some interesting development outcomes there if we had height, but I'll leave that alone.
Just have you got just an aerial map that shows that, or not? Doesn't matter if you don't.
So then, Mr. Chairman, if we,
okay, so that's a zoning map basically. So you can see that's the demarcation.
Yes, so through the chair, we do have mixed use around the station, so it's a transition, and it's really about not introducing actual residential uses into that light industrial area. So there's opportunities for mixed use along the highway, and then further down Christine Avenue. It was actually the reference group members themselves that suggested putting some density down along Christine Avenue.
Right, and I'll get to that in a second, but I suppose what's interesting to me is that we go high, low, high, and to talk about mixed use, for example, say an emerging business might be something in the film and TV space. We've got these studios that pop up, co-working spaces. Would they be some of the sorts of uses we would hope and expect to see in that purple area? I know, but I suppose I would expect that as our population continues to grow, we will end up having a dearth of commercial space available to accommodate creatives. And it may have made sense for me thinking maybe precinct goes gangbusters and they need, a national office above their current brewery. So they may redevelop and try and put in 2 or 3 or 4 stories, which could also accommodate, other participants in the industry in that commercial space. But if we're putting a cap there on that height, we're putting a cap on the capacity of that precinct to actually support jobs and growth. Because if there's no uplift in that existing purple area, I don't see that we've got an uplift in the job carrying capacity of that area, if that makes sense.
Through the chair, so in relation to that, it's quite rare for low-impact industrial areas to even build up to the existing 15-metre height limits that are there. So a 4-storey kind of product within a low-impact industry area is quite rare. Also, there's a fine balance within these areas where we don't want them to be replaced by all startup businesses because local communities really appreciate that low impact industry offering there as well. So as more opportunity could be and height afforded to these areas, we could see some of those uses kind of pushed out of that area and new uses kind of come in that the community actually really appreciates within this area. And just in relation to your comment about the kind of stepping down of heights, so we tried to make sure that there weren't sharp kind of changes within heights, that there was a stepping of height as well. So within the mixed use and neighbourhood centre zones there, the fronted stations, we allocated that height of 33 metres, but we didn't want a stark transition to 15. So yeah, those transitional arrangements were incorporated here down to that 15-metre height limit.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I could, through you, just tease out again my concerns about this 21 metre mapped height. So, okay, I get it. Main road, 21 metres, kind of makes sense. But that peach-coloured section, corridor, whatever you want to call it, only has the depth of one residential block, right? So 21 metres, how many stories could we likely achieve there from a residential point of view? Yeah, one house lot deep. And then I think to myself, okay, the 67 story development sitting on a lot that's one house lot deep, where are they going to accommodate their car parking? And then what does the driveway look like? And then,
so, Councillor Vorster, I think this report is reflective of what the community feedback has been. So we're not yet at a point, and maybe the officers can just give you some comfort around this.
I get that.
About making sure that it is a viable proposition. So Richard, do you want to just address that? It might help.
So through the chair, we did have discussions with the group about this particular issue, and it was also an issue that we discussed with the group along the Gold Coast Highway with the lots that face to the west. So the key thing here was you could do amalgamation still, so it's not precluding amalgamation. There are a lot of single dwellings through that area, and it was a very clear, I guess, response from the group that they didn't want us to extend that back into those cul-de-sacs. But you can still have a building site where they have acquired land both along Christian Avenue and then along those back streets, and that they tear the building down. So we do expect that we might see some mixed outcomes through there.
Sure. So, Mr. Chairman, I know that this is draft, and I know that this is community-led. All I'm trying to do is highlight what I think are some nuances to just plonking some heights on existing lots. Take, for instance, that lot to the north of Christian Avenue, so the extreme northwest. There's a tiny little lot sitting by a bridge that's mapped to 21 metres. Like, to me, again, that's an absurdity. If we have a look at that, what's that, Penguin Parade? Is that what it's called? Again, looking at the far east, I wouldn't expect that we would see a driveway, a VXO, on that bridge, knowing the traffic and the geometry there. We're most likely to see a VXO or access to any development on those lots off of Penguin Parade. And then, while we might have the step transition from a building height point of view, I think what we're doing is we're pushing the traffic issues that are induced by these high developments into the back streets. I think we've seen this a little bit in Palm Beach. Anyway, I just want to take this opportunity to say, yep, this is what the community said, totally get it, but I just want to throw this down today, that if we wholly accept it, I think there will be some unintended consequences. And I think we need to be very nuanced around what we actually permit from a lot point of view to take up to 21 metres.
Okay. Councillor Peter Young.
Thanks, Chairman. I wondered what the current height designations are on the eastern side of the highway there, please, because this is all consistently 55 metres. What is it currently?
It's currently 53 metres, so we've aligned it to the kind of new building categorisation that we have in Major Update 2 and 3, but it's remained as is.
All like that? A big solid blob?
That's correct.
All right, do you want to press on?
Thank you.
Okay.
Blob, yeah.
Yeah, so the CRG groups did generally support the increased height along the key east-west corridors, and particularly Christine Avenue, Mountain View Avenue, and the areas of heights of 15 metres and below will provide opportunities for more housing choice options across the area in the form, in compatible forms in the low, medium category. Similar to the Nobby Beach and Miami North area, the public realm transport and infrastructure map includes new pedestrian connections and crossings, a number of streetscape and placemaking investigations, stormwater projects, active transport connections, on-street car parking studies, particularly around the existing industrial areas, cycle path upgrades, and also park upgrades and master plan investigations. So moving forward from here, we propose that we move into the tailored engagement activity on the draft concept plans in April. And following that engagement, we update and amend the concept plans based on feedback and return the final versions to PEC in June or July this year. If endorsed, CERT will then move to prepare the city plan package with an aim to bring an amendment package back to committee in 2023. Any questions?
Yep. So, did you have those up-down maps?
Yeah, they are.
Do you want to just... So, oh no, Councillor Young's out of the room now. That's right, we might come back to that. Councillor Patterson?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I'm curious about the process, and with learning recently that we've got, it looks like another pause on our city plan amendments from the state government. So what does it look like? What's the impact on this proceeding if they're just holding off and not proceeding with our city plan amendments?
Through the...
Well, every delay pushes the entire planning process back because we can't really meaningfully continue on with a new step until we finish the last one.
Yeah.
Right. Any other questions on this item?
Just further on, excuse me. So is it just that we can't submit it until we've gone through the last amendment, or does it impact on what we would present based on what they would send back to us? Because we don't know what they're going to tell us about city plan amendments. My guess is once you know that, then that may alter. I'm just wondering whether this tailored, like the final piece of this puzzle, wouldn't you want to do that after you know what they're telling us about our city plan?
Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Patterson, that will happen. So I think given the timing of how this process will take, it will happen. I think it's very important and for the community to understand too that this is an extreme draft at this stage. We have not set policy. We haven't gone through the actual changes that would be required in the city plan. So the concerns that were raised earlier about, for example, the height, at that point in time, we've got a number of triggers and ways that we can add things into the city plan to do that. So whatever we choose to do at that time, plenty of options and we'll still look at it. The limits that I guess that have been on the plans today are those upper limits, and we can work with councillors as we will to do that. I think it's really important as well for the community to understand that we can't put a definitive height in our city plan. Our best chance is making sure that that strategic framework and everything is as tight and the intent from us is as clear as possible through that. And I think, Councillor Patterson, going back to the state government, given the nature of how all this timing will work out, we're hoping that that will be done at that point. But we have been engaging with the state officers, as Councillor Young said earlier, from the start of this process. And there might be things that as we get to drafting and that policy framework, there might be things that we change based on that advice. And of course, all of you will be involved in that at that point in time. And you're right, we can't submit anything until 2 and 3 is out. So there's other packages that we've got at the moment that are, effectively ready to go, that as soon as that is out, they'll be going through and we'll be working out the best ways. Correct.
So may I just, again, with what's currently with the state government, with the targeted growth areas, we do have defined heights for that. So I mean, if we're saying we can't do defined heights, but at the same time, we currently have a proposal with the state government saying we want defined heights for these areas. So I'm just a little bit confused on that.
So, Councillor Patterson, maybe we'll just talk about it later. Councillor Gates.
Chairman, I just wanted, for the benefit of Councillor Patterson and others, to say that in consultation with yourself and the Director, I have put through a call to the Deputy Premier's office to get information about when we might expect to receive amendment packages 2 and 3. And I only did that yesterday, and I would expect he was travelling, and made it clear that we're anxious to get those packages moving.
Okay. Councillor Young, the officers prepared a sort of heat map, if you like, on what was up and down. So maybe if you just bring that up.
We also have some handouts, if you would like them, that show the changes between what's existing and proposed in both meters and stories, just for information purposes. So.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
So, Councillor Young, just to address that.
Yeah, so looking on the screen, the text in red is the existing height, in green is the proposed height, and in blue is the change between those in meters. The existing height does not incorporate the 50% uplift, however.
Councillor Vorster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question on process through you to the Director. When was this agenda publicly available?
Through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor Vorster, it would have been 48 hours before today. Is that correct, ladies? Zara?
When
was the agenda publicly on the internet? We're required by legislation 48 hours.
I just wonder whether it was publicly available earlier.
Yeah, 48 hours.
So could I just ask whether you, through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Director, whether you're comfortable that all participants of the CRG adhered to requirements around either confidentiality or external communication around the deliberations of the committee and potential outcomes?
Through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor Vorster, we are, as far as I know, I'm not sure if there's anything that's happened that we're not aware of, excuse me. A lot of the information through the CRGs has been uploaded to our internet page. So I know there was an article in the Bulletin last weekend or the weekend before that we did review and provided some comments on it to make sure that it didn't have anything confidential in there. So as far as I know, unless there's been something else, what has been publicly distributed is what's publicly available at the moment.
Right, so there was a pre-publication, you were given the courtesy of a pre-publication check.
Through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor Vorster, it came through our media area and they gave us a heads up, and Zane and his team provided some comments back. And what we really wanted to do too at that point was impress that at this stage it was just draft, it was through the community, it was with community feedback, it hadn't gone through council and council had not made a decision at that point.
Sounds like a good process, thank you.
Okay, unless there's any other questions, we might move to the recommendation. Moved by Councillor Pauline Young, second by Councillor Peter Young.
The Youngs have it.
Yeah. Hey. Councillor Young, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for that. Having gone through this whole process, attending for each area, I can actually say that I am extremely impressed and grateful to the officers and the people that they provided to support the residents in going through the whole process. So just for information's sake too, as people who are on the CRGs came in, they didn't sit with the same people all the time. So they were moved to different tables. So there was a very, very widespread use of sharing of information, sharing of people's opinions. When we look at the people that attended the groups, there was education people, there was planning people, there was business owners, there was just families who have just moved into the area, families that have been long-term in the area. So we had a really good range of age, we had a really good range of businesses and views on what the Gold Coast should be, what they wanted to retain, what they wanted to see going forward. And people were very respectful of each other's opinions, but afterwards they chose not to get up from a table and leave the room. They chose to stay, and I'm sure some of the officers at times thought, I wish they'd go home, because they chose to stay towards the end of the meetings and to continue their conversations onwards. So in support of this process, I think it's definitely providing feedback back from our residents that they feel like they're part of a process, and that when they have been out, when the information has been in the newspaper, and that they have again taken other members of the community on board through neighbourhood watch meetings and other functions that I've been at where they've shared the information. So I think when we get feedback quite often with our consultation is that people weren't even aware it was happening, but this time round there's great conversations within the community. They're not all conversations that are positive about everything, but they're all conversations that are positive about the process, and there's somebody who lives next door to me, or I know so-and-so who's on that group, and they said it's a really, it's been a really frank and open conversation. And they're the ones who have led us to the maps that we've got there today. And we know this is the first stage and a very early stage, but I think there's probably 75% of the people that were on that original survey, or 76%, chose to be incorporated in the feedback going forward. So I think we've got a great community buy-in on these processes. And I think the things that came out, that stood out for me, were that they actually know that the city's growing, they know that the city's changing, and that as a council we have to be very diligent in where we see this population being homed within our city, and also the things that they're quite happy to accept change, and it's not speaking for everyone, but quite happy to accept change as long as what feedback they give is incorporated. And it's not just about building height, it's about having buildings that have a better articulation, have a greener concept, have more deep planting, that we have wider footpaths, that we have facilities to support the upgrowth, the uplift in the population in these areas. And I know the room is sick of me talking about Pizzey Park, but through this whole process, the absolute process, one of the greatest things to come out of that for me as a councillor was that the community expects the facilities to be fit for use and fit for purpose. They're happy to support these changes to our city plan, but they need to ensure that the facilities within our local area are fit for use. And it's not just the park, but it's the green space, and it needs to balance out what we're delivering infrastructure-wise. They want the linkages into Pizzey Park. They want the linkages into our beachfront parks to be green, to be shaded, to facilitate good pedestrian and good cycling connectivity within the community. So if I had to say anything from taking out from the community feedback was, yes, we will eventually get to a stage where we have recommended heights that may feed into an amendment to the city plan, but I think it's really, really important for us to also take on that. The bigger percentage of that feedback is that the supporting infrastructure has to be there, the supporting recreational uses, sporting uses, and open space to be able to service the additional people within our community. And again, I say 60 hectares in Pizzey Park, and a big increase within people within that catchment. We need to ensure that what we're providing for these residents is not only an increase in height and an ability to move into these areas and be part of a vibrant Gold Coast life, is also to ensure that our open space, our parks and our recreational areas are to a point that supports the community and the uplift of residential and a good variety of residential offering within the community. So I congratulate all the officers, because we hear things backwards and forwards all the time, or they don't listen, or that these officers listened, they took on board, no, not these guys, but they did. They listened, they took it on board, and they were so patient with people. And the people that were on those groups came out on the very last night and said, not only did they, someone's going to ding a bell, I'm sure, not only did they find the feedback great, but they actually said it was an education, that they had a far better understanding of what the officers have to go through. And when the state spoke as well, saying, you know, the last update has taken this long, this could be a 12 to 18-month process, they are able to now go out, as Councillor Gates was saying, go out to their community and say, well, talk about the 50% uplift. It was, and they had a far better understanding of the 50% uplift being the absolute cap. still didn't want to take it on board from us. They'd like to lose the 50%, but the feedback was that they realised we're going to have height and they just want it to be well supported. So thank you again for the officers and to the director for encouraging this process going forward.
Councillor Peter Young.
Thanks, Chairman. Certainly want to endorse those words and just comment that I'm really grateful that our city's got the capability to go through these kind of exercises very legitimately. We've got the resources and the skills to support this, and we've been blessed to have the involvement of the community, and I want to thank those reference group members for their participation in particular. I'm not that familiar with the investigation area process, which has been undertaken in advance in other places like Oxenford, but I'm expecting that there'll be a commensurate sort of effort from city planning and the engagement of the officers with the community ultimately in those processes. That's what I believe will happen, and directors giving the affirmative, so happy to support this. Thanks, Chair.
Anyone else want to speak against? Councillor Young, you happy for that to be closed? All right, we'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried.
Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair, can I just say Zane will get embarrassed here, but just really want to thank Zane. Zane's recently resigned from us and he's got a new adventure, very exciting for him and his family ahead, but just really want to thank Zane and all the work he's done with his team. So thanks.
Councillors. Can you hear me? Yep, great. This item's about the Southport Priority Development Area Development Scheme Amendment for the Gold Coast CBD Special Entertainment Precinct. Oh, I need a presentation. Yes, I do. As you can see, this has been through council, I think 6 or 7 times now, so I'm not going to go through too much background. But last time we came to you, we were just about to embark on public consultation. So we've now undertaken that public consultation. That was 22 business days between the 23rd of November and the 22nd of December. And we now have a draft submission report, and yeah, the next steps involve the Minister of Economic Development Queensland approving the development scheme and us completing a minor amendment to City Plan to then give effect to that special entertainment precinct, and introducing our local law to ensure that that's implemented effectively. So our public consultation, there was a suite of methods employed similar to many of our other engagement activities. We had quite a lot of traffic on GC Have Your Say, which was really pleasing to see, lots of visits and also downloads of the resources. We had over 300 submissions, which we also felt was quite high. Other PDA development scheme amendments that we've seen across the state have sort of in the order of about 20 submissions. So we thought that was quite good engagement from our Gold Coast residents. 99% of those submitters were from the Gold Coast, and over half of them were residing in Southport, basically, and near that special entertainment precinct. Almost a third were either regular visitors or work in Southport. And we had 2 submissions from industry groups, the Southport Chamber of Commerce and the Music Advisory Group. And across the board, the proposed amendment received strong support, 86% sort of outright support, with then a further 9% support in part for the SEP-related amendments to the development scheme. Over 80% support, and then 14% support in part for the introduction of the microbreweries as a land use in Southport within the Precinct 1. and almost 80% support and 15% support in part for some other general amendments to align with citywide planning policy within the development scheme.
Through you, to the director, I'm not sure who would know this, but was the inclusion of microbreweries to support a particular development application, or how did we come to form the view that this was an important and missing land use to support live music?
Through the chair, I can offer a couple of insights into that. One is that there's been an obvious sort of growth in microbreweries across the city, and they've been known as venues that do support kind of arts and culture and music as a whole. But also there's a statewide strategy around the support for, I think it's craft breweries or microbreweries, recognising the economic contribution that they make to the state and the city.
Right, thanks.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. Through you to Councillor Forster, I did specifically request that I think it was a bit of an anomaly of the PDA that microbreweries got excluded when it wasn't actually the intent of the PDA. They got caught up with other businesses like panel beaters, so we wanted just to be able to embrace that and bring it back in.
Is that the end, or are you?
No, sorry.
Keep going.
Okay. So there were 4 probably areas of concern that were raised in submissions that I did want to give you a quick overview of. One was the potential for noise impacts from the SEP, and that attracted, there were 19 submitters that touched on that. There were 12 that touched on existing kind of homelessness and social issues in Southport, and 7 touched on the inadequacy of car parking in the area to support SEP and microbreweries, and 10 questioned the appropriateness of Southport for the CBD location. And we've addressed all of these areas of concern in our submissions report. To address the issue of noise, we conferred with our acoustic consultants for this project just to confirm that the 3D modelling that we had undertaken for the city did appropriately deal with the fact that we do have existing residences within Southport, and making sure that we can assure that addresses the environmental protection policy around noise. We also I guess revisited the idea that the CBD is intended to be a vibrant 24/7 precinct. So we are looking to introduce these types of uses in that area. We also, in response to the social issues, we, I guess, covered off on some of the roles and responsibilities that the city has, but also state agencies have in addressing those issues, and spoke to the fact that the SEP actually may result in some positive impacts in its ability to activate some of the less activated areas of the CBD, and improving some of those outcomes. And we also spoke to the fact that Southport has great access to light rail and public transport, and it's not intended that we're going to be providing a lot of car parking within our CBD, and reinforced, I guess, Council's decision to introduce a SEP in Southport, and Southport being that appropriate location.
I mean, the reason why we're establishing the SCP to begin with is to overcome the issue of noise complaints prejudicing liquor licences, right? So no surprise that there may be a little bit of noise. But I wondered whether, as there's further sensitive development around the SEP, whether council would be in a position to condition more intensive acoustic treatments to mitigate nuisance complaints down the track. So, I mean, you can double glaze windows, you can put in all sorts of acoustic panelling on developments. Do you think we're going to be in a position to require that for adjacent development in order to manage those amenity risks?
Through the chair, absolutely. So as part of this amendment, part of it is establishing the requirements for amplified music venues, but the other really important part of it is making sure that any future residential development within this area does actually have an appropriate standard of acoustic mitigation.
That's good stuff.
I just wanted you to use the word acoustician.
Through the chair, we made some minor administrative and editorial changes to the document following consultation relating to definitions and things, and you can find these on pages 555 to 556 of the agenda report. We don't believe that the amendments will significantly change the development scheme, and we've had discussions with EDQ to that effect. But now I guess we're looking to submit that to EDQ to forward on to the Minister for his consideration. So the next steps that we've outlined here on the slide is that we send the documents off to EDQ, they review and put that forward to the Minister, and then hopefully within a couple of months the Minister will adopt the amendment and allow us to publish that and give effect to that. And then all that follows is a further city plan minor an administrative amendment to identify that special entertainment precinct spatially so that we can then give effect to the local law.
Councillor Patterson, if you turn your screen on, the thing will appear on your screen. You can take a photo a bit closer. Oh, okay.
Thank you. Thank you for helping me.
That's it, yes.
All right, any questions, councillors? No? All right. Councillor Patterson, I'd love to invite you to move that, except you're not on the committee. No. So, would someone like to move that? Moved by Councillor Borster, seconded by Councillor Peter Young.
And if I could please, through
defer
you
to Councillor Patterson if she would like to say a few words.
It'll be music to my ears.
Thank you. This is a exciting next step for Southport CBD and also for music and entertainment, live entertainment on the Gold Coast. It's really important that our venue providers don't feel concerned about providing entertainment and being concerned that they're going to lose their liquor licence. This enables a place for people to do that and to really take advantage of everything the CBD's got to offer. Being on the light rail, having that density and just turning it again into a highly walkable space. Also, it is my understanding that because this amendment can be put through quite quickly without having to wait for other city plan amendments, which would be delightful to see from the state government. Thank you.
Anyone else want to speak for or against? We'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. All right. 6.7. That's yours. It's got a number. It was so tempting to just let that slip through. Councillors, do we want just a 5-minute break? Oh, should we just quickly deal with this one? No. Let's just take a 5-minute break for everyone to have a comfort stop. Councillor Vorster, did you want a presentation or did you just have some...
I'm happy to move it if I've got a second, and I'll talk briefly.
Moved by Councillor Vorster, second by Councillor Owen-Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. Mr Chairman, I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank all of the city officers who have been involved in this assessment process. I've taken a very keen interest in this particular matter because in order to progress approval for what can appear to be a 10-storey development, city officers have had to have regard to very special provisions to the plan of development, which is a creature of Robina's specific planning regime. Through this process, we've had a position taken by interested parties in Robina that the developer...
If we can just pause to welcome the CEO to his first planning committee meeting at 11:01. Let the record show.
Just not in the middle chair.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Vorster.
Oh, happy to leave it at that.
No, it's important.
Anyway, long story short, I just want to thank city officers. I want to thank city officers for dealing in good faith with my office and addressing some of my concerns around the landscaping treatment, which is terribly important because while this building has a Labour Drive address, it's very unlikely that pedestrians and the public will be appreciating the building from the Labour Drive frontage. In the fullness of time, it will be the River Walk, Lakeside Walk, which will be the most prominent viewpoint of this development, and it was important to me that the landscaping be preserved and very sympathetic to what should be a tree-lined, very pleasant walk. I mean, let's not forget an adjacent road is called Arbour Avenue for a reason. So again, thanks to city officers and thank you to the director for allowing this to be progressed through committee, because what it does do is assert council's position that there is no such thing as a 40-day deemed approval so long as council deals with development applications in an expeditious view. And that's why we're dealing with it today, to assert that position. And I would say that any would-be applicants in the Robina area should take note of what we're doing today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vorster. Anyone else want to speak for or against? Councillor Vorster, you happy with that to be closed? Take the vote. All in favour. Division. Councillor Hamill, Councillor Owen-Jones, Councillor Gates, Councillor Peter Young, Councillor Vorster, Councillor Pauline Young, Councillor O'Neill, Councillor Caldwell. Against? Carried. Unanimous. All right, that's 6.7. We're on the 7? Yeah. Okay, so councillors, we'll move to item 7.1, which is confidential. Just trying to see where the... so we only need to move into confidential if there's any questions or concerns. Otherwise, I'm happy to take a mover.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I actually don't have that item in my package.
It was at the end of volume 2. Grey paper.
At the end of what, sorry?
You might have not picked up the second bundle.
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
I only have
that's
this on
right.
my desk, sorry.
We'll bring it in.
Just got a moment, thank you.
Councillor Tozer, welcome. We haven't quite completed the committee meeting. You can stay. Well, we'll give you a yell. Yeah. Yeah, okay, well, councillors, let's just move into closed. Moved by Councillor Owen-Jones, seconded by Councillor Pauline Young. All in favour? Sorry, we should state a reason just before we do that. The reason, as set out, was the legal advice. So we'll go with that bracket E, basis for confidentiality. All in favour? Against? Carried. So moved by Councillor Peter Young, seconded by Councillor Caldwell. All right, we'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. All right, so that's 7.1. I think that's the last of our listed items. I can't see any hands. I can't see any hands up. Can anyone see any hands up?
That's your peripheral vision, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, I know. I'm just looking at RBL here going, please don't be real.
That's your molecular...
Oh, Councillor Vorster. How can I help you?
What's wrong? Councillor Caldwell, I would like to move a general business item, which I've provided to our Minute Secretary in her inbox. And happy to read it while that's potentially being copied on screen. And it reads that the Chief Executive Officer, CO, makes representations to the Office of Fair Trading and any other relevant regulators seeking amendments to property advertising rules which would require real estate advertisements to alert consumers when projects have not yet secured council development approval, and that the CO or their delegate notify councillors of the outcome of these representations. If I have a second, I'd love to talk about why it's important to protect consumers. Thank you, Councillor Young. Thank you very much. Teachers in for turning up.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Look, Mr. Chairman, now that I have a second, I'll just speak very briefly to this. I'm sure we'd all be familiar with residents raising concerns about developments that have been brought to market which have not yet been subject to council approval and not yet gone through the very rigorous process that we take as a committee and council to finessing development to meet community expectations. It can be very jarring for a community to see the first iteration of a plan, expecting that to be the final outcome because things are being sold off the plan. I would hope and expect that the Office of Fair Trading, who are charged with looking after consumer issues, might see their way to tweaking their real estate advertising rules to require project proponents to list in a prominent place that a project has not yet received council approval at the time that those projects are advertised. It's not attempting to dissuade sales, but I think it's an important step we need to take to try and assuage community concern that what's presented on a brochure meets council's expectations, when in fact that may not be the case. And without naming the project, because I can't, it's only a vague memory to me, but some months ago, a story was carried in the Gold Coast Bulletin about a project that had sold out or had received $40 million worth of pre-sales, I forget. But that was ultimately, I think, refused under delegation. So, Mr. Chairman, I feel as though we can prevent a lot of unnecessary concern in the community and protect buyers if we can secure the simple change from the state.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Vorster. Councillor Owen Jones, you want to speak against?
No, speak to it if that's possible. Does that cover where it's just an expression of interest or a holding deposit or $1,000? So your intent is to have marketing material clearly indicate that it's subject to council approval or the like, but does that actually prevent holding deposits being taken?
No, so Mr. Chairman, I don't mean to fetter in any way the manner in which these transactions are carried out. What I would merely like to do is that when a project is marketed, that marketing material include mention that the project may not yet have received council approval. I think the simplest way of achieving the best outcome, and at no cost.
Wait a sec. Planning's still happening, Bob?
Is on like a realestate.com.au or domain.com.au listing. You know, it's a simple one sentence that's a signpost to constituents. Could even be in newspaper advertising, I'm not sure. I just think that's really important.
Councillor Pettier.
Thanks, Chairman. Generally, I'm supportive, but it's a bit of a can of worms here. So, for example, I've seen advertisements saying you can get a subdivision on this property and it's clearly incorrect under the state planning laws. You can't. So this motion wouldn't capture that. It would. So you could still be required to say this approval has not been granted for a townhouse or something, but on the other hand, you could say...
I mean, this is to address a specific issue.
Yeah.
The issue about false and misleading conduct or negligent misrepresentation or whatever it might be, which can apply to second dwelling type approvals or Airbnb approvals, all of those things that agents tend to get very excited about and put on the notice board and say, here's your second income from your Airbnb, and the thing doesn't have approval. Those things I think are separate and probably covered by the legislation, albeit it needs someone to hold them to account on it. But this is aimed at particularly closing a loophole where the property doesn't, they're holding it out to be subject to registration, but actually it's even a step further than that because it hasn't got the council approval yet. So
I don't see any difference.
Hey?
Frankly, I don't see any difference, Chairman. If you're advertising a property as having a B&B that can be rented out, that's not been approved. That's the same as whatever the original intent was here. So I just think that it's a bit of a can of worms, and and this may be too specific and it's not broad enough, and therefore if it's so broad that it really gets captured by all of those other fair trading rules that exist at the moment.
So, Mr. Chairman, the issue that I'm trying to overcome is when an advertisement or a property prospectus is silent.
Yeah.
Right? So I think in the examples that Councillor Peter Young raised, there's the suggestion that there is a council process around an approval. Whether or not they're misrepresenting the likelihood of an approval being secured, that's quite apart from my concern that sometimes there are real estate advertisements that invite you to purchase a unit on the beachfront and this is what they'll look like. They're silent on the fact that that has not gone through a council assessment and approval process, and that can lead consumers to form the view that this has been approved. And from a council point of view, we suffer reputational risk because communities believe that these things are a foregone conclusion. And I think it's important that we encourage proponents to be more responsible in their representations, to manage the expectations of the community and prospective buyers so that we can, go through an assessment process that's not clouded by dozens and dozens and dozens of complaints of concerned residents that are probably inflammatory because they've been caught off guard and we haven't had the opportunity of bringing them along the assessment journey.
Councillor McDonald.
Mr. Chair, I've had two in recent times. Last one that we approved last council meeting down near the Palm Beach Parklands. Before council had even received it, it was advertised and they were selling off the plan. The other one that I recall is 2nd Avenue at Burleigh, where the officers had gone for approval. Council refused it. I had people who were purchasing those units complaining that the officers had told them or had told the developer that they were approving it. So why did council refuse it? So, and I think... Yes. So maybe, there's something probably further back. I don't know what discussions our officers have with the applicants, but they're certainly using that as a tool to say we've got council approval. And
so through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor McDonald, we would always be communicating with applicants what the officer's recommendation is, and applicants, consultants know that that's not the final decision until it goes through council. So, I mean, we we couldn't stop that. The information's publicly available. The reports are on the agenda 48 hours before that. But Councillor Vorster's absolutely right. There's numerous occasions that I can think of where there's site officers that go up, and a few recently that we have refused, where they've had actual hard infrastructure for the site officers and they were refused.
So, Councillor Young, maybe it's not perfect, but it's probably a starting point for a discussion around trying to provide a level of transparency that's not currently there. And the difficulty I have had over the years is, particularly in a rising market, people will sell their home to downsize to an off-the-plan unit type project. That unit project ultimately doesn't proceed without an approval, and they're left having cashed in their principal place of residence, thinking they've been able to jump across, and the market moves in the interim, and it becomes really problematic for people who then have in good faith tried to move from one place to another.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. And it's pretty broad when you talk about advertising, because it's not only on real estate advertising. I mean, a development in Rainbow Bay, for instance, were all sold out before they got approved. They even had signage, signwriting signage fly over. So what do you do there? I mean, you are opening up a can of worms, because it's pretty widespread, and not only on just real estate advertisements.
Yeah, we need to protect.
All right, Councillor Peter Young.
Thanks, Chair. As I said, I'm notionally in support of this. I just wondered about the wording. So asking through you if the mover might include the words after projects, just to add, or identified outcomes or promoted outcomes have not yet secured, or blah, blah, blah.
Projects or promoted uses? Or
yeah. Something like that.
Yeah.
To be honest, I threw projects in there because I couldn't think of a better word. I mean, what I was most concerned about are big unit developments that are overly ambitious, that may be materially different in scale or design through an assessment process.
I understand.
I haven't had much regard to smaller scale things.
Yeah.
But if you think we get better coverage with promoted uses, I'm happy.
I might just get, just to flesh out the wording there, I think Alicia might just suggest that we bring it back to something that's actually a bit more development
focus,
terminology related.
Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Vorster and Young, what I just suggested to Councillor Caldwell was we could say to alert consumers when development outcomes have not yet secured council development, because then it covers an outcome on the site.
Yeah, high five.
Great.
Joined together by the thin thread between the Nerang railway station and the Varsity Lakes railway station.
All right, councillors. So we've got a motion moved by Councillor Vorster, seconded by Councillor Peter Young, in a contest of who loves trees the most.
One.
All right, anyone want to speak to that further? We'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. Yeah, everyone was for. Councillor Gates, you were for. That was not. That was a delay. General business. All right. Well, we'll close the meeting at 11:28. Don Johnson's just arrived in the back there. Hey?